Well, let me jump right in by asking, like, how would you describe your intermedial conception of music, as you describe it in your bio, and how does that play
Mm,
into your music making?
Hmm. I guess it goes the other way around. I started using different mediums like sound and lights. That was my very first try on stuff like that, and it was uh, very productive for me to see how I can fluidly thinking both things as music. And I started to question what it means and why, how I can articulate that as my musical experience. Can I legitimately say that I see light as musical material? Am I just being superficial? Like these kind of questions make me wonder, but my bodily experience was really real. Seeing lights and receiving musical information is something very similar to I came from a classical music background, and so I immediately think of that feeling is so similar to listening to Brahms Symphony Orchestra, um, and so not Brahms symphonies, um, and so I started question and started to interact with the communities that are very interested in doing things in between media, and and I and it started to prove that it is something that we don't talk enough. We immediately see that as music, and you would say, of course. But then the more I work with it, I work with dancers, I work with video artists who perform with videos. Um, I work with musicians of different kinds, and I started to realize that this intermediate conception of music is very, very powerful.
Yeah, so we went to Bowling Green together. I don't remember exactly which years we overlapped, but I think you were there both years when I was there for the 4 years I was there for my doctorate. And
I
at
think we
that
started
point,
at the same time, no?
we might have, yeah. So, the master's program is only 2 years, so I don't remember when people cycled through. I was pretty sure we overlapped for 2 years, but at that point, were you thinking about these things yet in grad school, or not until later on?
Until later on, maybe something. Um, hmm. It was quite a transition. When I was at Bowling Green, I was still thinking of doing things mostly on scores and how I can make a scores that communicates my musical ideas. Um, but at the time, I felt like there was something wrong. There's something that it doesn't speak to me. I wasn't really realizing that until I moved to New York and I started to perform more. In Bowling Green, I also occasionally I improvised with voice. But when I moved to New York after that, I it was pushed by the fact that I could not afford a piano, and so I started improvising with voice a lot. And I realized that I'm not interested in being a vocalist, but I'm interested in using my voice as a medium to express the music that is in me. And so that question stuck with me quite a bit. And I kept asking myself, what else can I do if I'm not interested in being a vocalist? Um, there's something very powerful for me being a musician, um, to make music that that is beyond the instrument. Or how can you, or the question is, what is your instrument? How can you define your instrument? Even if you're playing saxophone, for example, you can still use it differently. Um, and so these questions really stuck in my mind, and it was it was actually after, let me think. It was in my second year of my PhD, and I had opportunity learn how to use Arduino that pushes me to look for different objects to engage with small little computer, microcomputer. And that was the time I started using light bulbs. And I started to realize that, actually my idea of having me performing on voice, I can see the essence of it is not in the voice. It's how I imagining music, how I translate it, how I present it. And I also realized I was very interested in thinking about musical concepts and how they overlap or how they interact to make interesting results. And these things adding up together, I have to say this is very coincidental, and they all came together and give me a really big light bulb moment, and I wanted to keep doing this.
Why do you like light bulbs?
I don't know. It was also very coincidental because I was taking a workshop from ICE. They taught me how to use Arduino, and they taught me how to build a little instrument that has a photo sensor in it. And they also later on asked me to write a piece with that. And I was really excited, but I have no idea what I can do. So I walk around the house that I was living at that time, and I suddenly found out a lot of light bulbs that my roommates used for parties. And I was like, I can use that. And so well, it's just a very slow process that you realize that there are light bulbs in your house. You never thought of using light bulbs to create something, but then the instrument that you were learning to build is very inviting for you to use light bulb. And then it becomes a feedback loop in my process that um, I started to realize that light bulb actually is very powerful thing, a powerful medium for me to express. I was also very attracted, especially with the quality of incandescent light bulbs. That the subtlety, there is a lot of subtlety in the filaments if you look into that, and to me that gave me a lot of musical quality. And I was just very curious, and I started to create quite a number of pieces that are around light bulbs. I'm not against other lights though.
When you say that you worked with ICE, is this the trio piece that you made that you performed with Dennis and Levy?
And Levy. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about that piece because in that piece, when I compare it to some of your more recent stuff, like the solo for light switches and noise, the light bulbs in that piece are not fixed. They are colored, and you have
Mm-hmm.
various kinds, like Christmas lights and stuff as well. So I'm just wondering if you could talk us a little bit through the transition. It seems like more recently you're using more static placement and more clear or white
Mm.
bulbs. So, as how does one develop a language in light?
um, there were a lot of decisions for sure. In the beginning, I wasn't. It was just more about exploring the instrument. Actually, the instrument that we were playing was designed by Levi Lorenzo, and that was the instrument that he showed us at the ice workshop how he made it. and and that piece was I was commissioned to write the piece around that instrument. So there are things that is already fixed in the instrument. You know that there's a photo sensor, there's a speaker, and then depending on how you control the lights, you have different electronic synthesized sounds. But you can map different synthesized sounds according to different intensity. That that is part of your decision. And so for me, I was exploring how to use that, and I was really fascinated by the idea of bridging the analog and digital way of making sound, how our movement is translating into electronics. And um, I was obsessively thinking, well, so one of the things that I found in my house was different colors of light bulbs. And I was fascinated by the fact that, okay, we only have two hands. We all, like, I only have two hands. I'm one of the performers. And I realized that having two different colors on my hand, you can create the third color. Very simple. But to me, it's very effective, especially when you see blue light and yellow light. Blue light and yellow light, you will have a green shadow sometime. And I was fascinated by movement, and the movement on one hand becomes the rhythm, the visual rhythm of the piece. At the same time, because of your different position of holding lights, you create different positions of the shadows in the back. And so I wasn't really trying to think what I wanted to do. I just wanted to be able to manage different variables in a piece that I find it very interesting, very dynamic, could be very theatrical in a piece, to create a piece for three people. And I also loved Christmas lights and I put it in the middle, and I thought it's a very subtle way in putting it in the middle. So we all have two controllers, two dimmers to control the Christmas lights, and all the lights are going in the middle and pile them up together. So you cannot quite see which light belongs to who. But at that time I was trying to find ways to find a way for three people to use their own imaginations, and how the imaginations interact with each other, and you see it in a different medium that is also musical, but it's not sound. And so with the delicate quality of the Christmas light, I thought it was appropriate for the piece to put it in the end, so that the kind of the concept of music from sound slowly transitioning into light, and there are music that we actually perceive without sound. That was my very first attempt to do that. But later on, I wanted to develop this idea, and I realized that well, the the opportunities that I had afterwards was mostly solo stuff, and playing with the same kind of light actually, to my eyes, communicates strongly about this light, because people are not distracted by the colors anymore. People focusing on the light. And I was really interested in looking into this light intensity, and how the intensity and proximity really change the feelings that we perceive through the light bulbs. And so I started using just one color, and I started playing with different positions, and kind of because light and body and shadows has a strong relationship. However, when you see these three things together, there are still distances between light, body, and shadows. And so the angle, the sizes of the shadow, somehow it becomes an unpredictable part, because you never knew until you finally see the shadow. And I find this very productive, because in a way, music also deals with tension and predictability. And it works for my idea very well. And yeah, so I started doing that, and the video that you saw with just light and noise and switches, I was intentionally, it was a performance that I made for an online event. So I knew that it is a piece for the camera. And so I intentionally turn down the exposure to eliminate the shadow and see what else I can do without shadows. So in different pieces, I was trying to play around with different relationships that I observe that is in play in between the light, the body, the performer's body, and and the shadow. And sometimes I exaggerate one thing, sometimes I eliminate the other thing, sometimes I put them all together. And um, and I did a piece that with a quartet that we were just focusing on the shadow, that we put a big screen in front of us. So on one hand, um, we seemingly hiding behind the screen, but through the lights, you see all our shadows on the screen. So you don't see our body, but you see the shadow of our body. Somehow you also see us, but you don't really see us. So it creates that kind of ambiguity. And also because light always happens behind you. And if you have one more screen before you, you to me, somehow you're creating a big object on stage that is somehow communicate shadows in a 3D way. And I started to realize that shadows also very interesting to work with when you blow up a shadow um, really, really big as the ceiling, as the space, the height of the space. Somehow it creates some kind of illusions about the architecture of the space, and that also changes um, my my feelings when I perceive those music from the space and shadow, which is very fascinating to me. I don't have a conclusion what it is yet, but I've been trying to use different pieces to explore these elements.
So I'm wondering how, I know that most of the time you're performing by yourself, but I'm curious to know, like for the trio, for example, was there any notation for that piece, or how did you communicate the structure or the material, the gestures, and how much of it was improvisatory with the people you were
Mm.
playing with, and how much of it was notated, or you directing them versus like when you
Mm.
play by yourself?
Hmm. For the trio piece, I definitely had a score, but I was also trying to navigate the space between notated music versus improvised music. Um, so I had a brief structure, and I mentioned a few things that in this structure I really want this. Um, and most of the things we kind of worked it out in the rehearsal. So it was kind of like a score as a starting point, and we choreograph in the rehearsals, and then we present it. Versus my solo pieces, I had a hard time to define what it is, um, because on the surface I am always improvising with the instruments that I built. However, I also started to realize that the circuit that I built controls so much to a degree that is almost like a score. So I've been really fascinated by this idea that Tudor mentioned back in the 60s, that uh, circuit actually can be the score in electronic music. And this is also an idea that I wanted to develop in work in progress. um, but I do find it very strange that the way I play as a soloist, you can really see my desire to play as a performer and control as a composer at the same time. But also at the same time, it's so extreme because the improvised part is very improvised, and the control part, I'm also trying to control it as much as I can. And but also the control part requires so much precision that also doesn't allow me to have a lot of wiggle room, if that makes sense. And so I started to have a hard time to describe what this is. I will just present that as my piece. I'm not gonna tell you. Well, now everybody knows. but but I have been hiding it for a while, that I don't want people to know whether it's a score or a performance. I would actually want people to think it is a performance. I don't think um, whatever kind of score it is, the focus should be the musical result. If that, if the, if some kind of idea is should be expressed in notated music, I think it's really great. I also really enjoy that a lot of things that involves precisions and virtuosity, you can really see that from a notated score. Like if it came from a notated score, that exaggerate a lot of virtuosity of the performing performer. But at the same time, I'm also very fascinated by this improvised music world, because the interactions between gestures, person, human, and instruments, or between objects, there it is such a complex world that if we improvise, if we focus on our listening, we can bring so much more out of it. Of course, that deals with another level, another kind of virtuosity, but that's a very different kind. So I've been really enjoying the extreme extremes of both worlds, and I can sort of see the influence in my work on that.
Wait, can I just want to ask one more question about that? And then maybe we'll move on from the light bulbs, or maybe Kyle has another follow up. But I guess I'm curious, from performance to performance, if you keep notes on like how things went for a performance. Do you make sure to record them so that you can get feedback of like how well the shadows worked, or how well the different elements combined? Or is it more like you'd rather not take notes and be that organized about it? I'm just curious how you keep progressing and keep your thoughts organized.
Right now, I still perform mostly by myself. um, and so I controlled it. and and I don't have I don't to me, having a score or a repeatable performance is not my priority. I think there's a lot in between, that is in between the light, my body, and shadows, or the way I perform has a lot to say already, however I play it. Just because that's why I started to see my instruments are my scores, because they already communicate the things that I wanted to communicate. With working with people, for now I still mostly work with people that I have quite a lot of rehearsal time with, um, to perform. So we always rehearse in a way. We came up with an idea. I always like that to be a collaborative performance, and so every time is different depending on how your collaborators imagine music, how much they can offer in the music, or how much you can offer to their music, so to feed it back to your music. And so right now I'm not so interested in making a repeatable performance. I also realize that performing with light is not something that, because my idea of light is not just about turning on and off. It's not just the color. It's not like, oh, if you see this, you do this. There's so much more. I want to embrace this the complexity that we perceive light as music, and how people interact with it is even more complex. And so usually my approach is really just rehearse for a few days for performance, and we are very clear what is important here. How are we gonna proceed this? So it's a very collaborative process for me. And so right now I'm also not so interested in writing any scores for that reason.
Can you talk a little bit about your control strategies for the lights? I mean, I know that I've watched this, you use your bulbul hardware. Is that your main strategy for controlling the lights, or do you have others? And what went into creating that hardware?
Bobo was my first attempt to build my own um, instrument. The way I build it is actually very simple. I usually don't make the hardware part and software part very complicated. I'm interested in connecting these objects in a way that is satisfying. And then I like to see what the human imaginations can contribute in that. So it's also very hard to describe because there's so much you want to control in the circuit. And you know that so much while you're building the circuit, you know the kind of music that you want to make so that you build the circuit in a certain way. But you also know that light is such a site-specific medium. It depends on the sizes of the room, how many objects in the room that you have, how many shadows that you can get. It's also not precise. Like, you know that when you show up in a venue, you're gonna improvise because this is new to you. So I think it's a difficult question. The bubble was my first attempt to control the lights in a very simplistic way, so that I have something that I can just show up in the venue and plug in and play. Right now I expanded it, so Bobo only has 4 channels. Right now I always play with 12 channels, where I have a controller which I build with paper and conductive tape, so that so it's basically you show up with all the lights, and then the controller is a piece of paper that is taped on the performing table. But the thing that is great is that because paper and the tape are so thin, your fingers can just go around like drawing. And to me, it's a lot more spontaneous. And um, I also realized that because I put all the conductive tape on the piece of paper, and the circuit becomes really open, and your hand is actually easily access to, let's say if you put a whole palm on the controller, you're basically hitting on to all the buttons. However, the microcontroller doesn't really like you to do that. They don't function in that way. They like one step at a time. So when you put your hands down, there's a lot of noise in there. So that was the noise that you heard from the last piece that I sent you. And I really like this kind of, it's not exactly short circuit, but basically that's the the microcontroller saying, no, I don't like it. But for us as a person who likes sounds, it's like, this is great sound, because usually you just hit one button, you hear, and then you hit another one, it's like another pitch of, it just clicks. But then if you put your whole palm in there, it's just like it's a new sound. So I loved it. I don't care about the microcontroller. So you see that the whole process, it's basically my balancing act, or it's not even balancing act. It's just going back and forth to try to control everything and lose all the control, and let the space, the instruments, the potentials in this instrument speaks for itself. So that's also part of it. I started getting really interested in building my own instrument, because the whole process is, it's a feedback. It's a it was a conversation between me and the machine. And over time, it grows somehow.
So what's your personal history with improvisation? I know you touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can take us
Hmm.
back to when you started improvising, how you started doing this, and all the way up to now, and how it informs your current projects, like not just your work with light bulbs and those pieces, but in your other work as well.
Hmm. Mm. um, I started, I think I started improvising in undergrad, although at that time I had no idea what it means, honestly. I was just like, this is cool. I can do whatever, and it seems to make sense. And and um and I didn't really have a strong emotions towards that. But I think I started getting into it when I started in Bowling Green, and I like that they have a, a improvising community that people get together and do something. And I think that, to be honest, at that time I also did not know what it means, but I find it really liberating that I can use whatever, that I can imagine, use whatever instruments, either piano or just hands or two wine bottles or my voice, um, and I can interact with musicians in a meaningful way. That's what I like about it. I just wanted to join the community. I just want to play together. Um, I was also, yeah. Just whenever I had that kind of opportunities, I would just join. And but that question become more of a question for my artistic practice when I moved to New York, when I realized that I cannot have a piano. Even I could buy a piano, my neighbors are not gonna like my piano. um, um, and then I started performing with a lot of voice, and I started to keep thinking like how I got here. It's a very interesting trajectory for me to see. Like I thought I did not really improvise seriously until I started using light bulbs, actually, I think. So it was like 3 years ago. Um, but if I think a little further, I think when I was a kid, when I played piano, I always liked the idea of not practicing on the piano, but imagining the music in my head. And I think that really stuck in my head that I can actually imagine music. I, I don't need the instrument. Well, it's not like I don't need the instrument now. It's like the instrument can be the variable, can be anything. Um, and so I see that how this recent um, trajectory of my musical development actually, my childhood actually plays an important role in that, which I did not really realize. And that still really stuck in my mind. I'm very interested in seeing when people improvise together, how our musical imaginations actually in play. Our instruments really are the channel to amplify what we imagine. Um, to me, it seems to be a very powerful thing for me to see music that way, I think.
So this also brings me to the question of some of your other recent work, like the piece that you wrote for the string quartet called "A String Quartet." I
Mm-hmm.
really love this piece, and I had seen it a while back, like closer to when it was either posted, like the video was posted or something. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then I watched it recently, sort of preparing for this interview. And then I was like, oh yeah, Viola wrote that. That's so interesting now that I've been following your work with the light bulbs, and like going back to that was just really interesting for me to think that this was created by the same person. So I'm just curious what that score looks like and how you worked with the quartet to produce that. And, you know, like what are the similarities between that work? Like, how is that connected to
Mm.
your other work?
Yeah, I think that was the first time. That was the time when I first think of not having a score. I was questioning if we really need scores in our performance. Um, and so I was thinking a lot, um, what is important? What is this piece is trying to speak about? And if do we really need a score for that? I was trying to be open. It was not like a challenging question for myself. Um, and I was really interested to see. I guess I just love all the harmonics on strings in general, and so I'm really obsessed with like calculating all the partials and stuff. I had a period of time doing that all the time. Um, and I was thinking, maybe I can blow it up. Like if I have a longer string, then I can have more partials, right? and and so that was the first motivation for me to do that. And I thought, I was like, okay, so if one person using a monochord, pressing one note, pressing one finger on any point on the string, you're basically creating a sound. At the same time, you're dividing the string. That means another person can come in and play on one side of the string. It will have one pitch, and another person comes in to play on the other side of the string. It will have another pitch. So I think theoretically, you will have three different sonic results by just pressing somewhere on the string and having two other people play on each side of the string. And so for that piece, I was very interested in seeing how musicians are related, not just um, not just using. I guess I would. I guess I was trying to combine them. So usually a string quartet, people having four instruments on one instrument on each person. However, when you combine them combine them on one string, you're exaggerating their relationships. I was also very interested to see what kind of relationships that they could get. So in the whole process, it was also basically like a choreography that we play. We come into the rehearsals and we play. We come up with some sounds that we really like, and we basically create the piece together. And yeah, we decided on a structure, but I would have to say it's mostly an improvisations that came from rehearsals.
What did you learn working through your project Influx with the dancers?
What did I learn? That was quite special because I don't really get a lot of chances to work with dancers. And that dance group, run by Sydney Mosley, is a group that they emphasize. They want to do everything in a democratic manner, which is really, to me, it was I learned so much just from the process, from the democratic system that everybody has the same equal amount of voice in the group, and everybody just brings in what they have. And but of course at that time, I mean, when everybody has equal voice, that also kind of assumed that everybody has the same amount of responsibility, to chip in, to think, to critically think and perform and put in artistically, intellectually, stuff like that. So it was super productive for me and Sydney. We just got together in the beginning. We were like, hey, this is what I do. And she was like, hey, this is what I do. And this is what we do. And she always used we. She doesn't really see herself as, although she's the choreographer of the group, she doesn't see herself, um, she sees herself more like an organizer that facilitate the whole group and encourage the whole group to contribute a lot artistically. And so for that piece, we were exploring how movements, um, that interact with the audio feedback. So I was creating an audio feedback system, and then the because feedback is created by the relationship between the microphone and the speaker. With the distances, like when you change the distance between the microphone and speakers, or if you put something in between the microphone and speakers, you change all the quality. However, it is a very site-specific medium that whatever whatever venue that you get, you have to kind of get used to it all over again because it's a different space. Feedback works differently. And so it relies on our listening. So we, in the rehearsals, we did a lot of exercise just to listen, just to explore and learn how the instruments behave. We talk a lot about behaviors, like the behavior of the instruments, the behavior of the dancers, how you interact with things, with the sounds, and at the same time you interact with the movements of other dancers to make it a performance. So it was very, very nice for me to collaborate really from the beginning. We just put things on the table and talk, and then try, and then come up with an idea and try, and eventually we had the performance.
Sounds like a lot of your work is kind of a duet with architecture in a way, right? Because a lot of these are very the architecture is a huge variable, right? It would change
Yeah,
completely the
totally.
shadows and as well as the harmonic resonance within the room and stuff like that. Do you always think about architecture in your improvisational language, or is that just kind of the nature of it? You have to.
I think now I spend a lot of time to think why I am attracted to this. A lot of things that really came really naturally. I just, with this medium, like you meet as the artist of the work, you immediately think, okay, light and shadow, it deals with space, and so you are aware of space a lot. But then, um, when you look what I've done, actually it has a lot of things to do with space. I don't know why, but I also started to realize that I don't know if it's completely irrelevant, but I started to see a lot of, I'm very interested in seeing the relationships, like the relationships that is in play in a performance. So relationships between my gestures, the relationships between the objects that I put together, what kind of relationships that, what kind of sounds that could emerge from a particular relationships, or the relationships between two performers. Um, and then the relationship that I built during the performance with audience, with the space. And I started to, also started to ask what the space could offer, because affect is such a big thing that we experience in music. And a lot of them, I guess, especially in my work, it deals with the space. What kind of space does it have? What kind of material that the space is built from? What kind of I mean, basically, either feedback or light. You need to work with space. You need to work with space a lot. And so I guess that's I cannot answer this question. I agree with you. It is a theme, and I will still have to explore it. But that becomes also one of the things that I think a lot is the visual space in our listening. Like it does play a big role in our listening, and how not just audio space, which we have talked a lot, but also how visual space actually plays a role. You might actually recognize that when you listen to a piece with everything, all the lights on, versus in a complete dark room is different. But there's so many things in between. Can are there any interesting things that is actually productive in thinking of our listening? That is something that I'm currently very interesting to. I'm very interested to look into. So that also deals with space. um, yeah, I will tell you more next year. I need some time.
I mean, that response was interesting because we talk about like, you know, how we present our music as performers and our posture and how that affects how the music is perceived. But we don't
Mm,
often talk about like the type of venue in terms of how far away the audience is, and, you know, how close together are the audience members to each other, and how well can they see the performer. Because like Viola, I remember seeing you perform with light bulbs at the New Music Gathering in Boston just a couple years
mm.
ago, and I had seen a video of your work, but I hadn't seen it live. And that stage was especially, I thought it was very cool for your performance because the back wall was white and your
That was a
shadows
huge white
were
wall.
huge. And I know how tiny you are. And it was just so cool. I mean, so I had the advantage of knowing, you know, what you look like and what it feels like to stand next to you. But like, because I'm also small, but I feel like big when I stand next to you. Not big, that's an exaggeration. But like when you played that piece, when you were performing, I just remember being like just it was overwhelming, like the massiveness of the piece. Like it just seemed huge just because it wasn't even that loud, but it was like the size of your shadows. And was just thinking, like, how much do the shadows have to do with the piece? Was this planned out? How is this? And I never got to ask you, so I finally, like 2 years later, I'm asking you now. But so I
That
think
might
your
be a
response
better
is
time.
what.
Well, that is a better time to ask me 2 years later, because I've developed more thoughts on that.
Yeah, but I think that that's an interesting thing to think about, that not, you know, not all musicians do, is like the space itself and all of the different aspects of it and how that factors in.
Totally. I mean, that piece is also the performance that you saw was also very interesting because the stage was really deep, and the back white wall was huge, and I was like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm such a small person and I only have 2 light bulbs. Like, what am I gonna do? How am I gonna fill up this space? Versus, well, especially when I work with lights, you see that people reactions are very extreme. You There was one time I was playing in a very small living room, and people really sit in front of me, and you see that people are like this when they when I was performing, they were either like this, and some people even like close their eyes, and some people even left the room, um and because some people thought it's cool, but to some people it's very intense, and even not everybody can experience a piece of mine, because I always flicker lights really fast, and and just not it's just not the kind of thing that everybody can take it comfortably. um it's definitely also like the audio feedback as well. They're very sensitive to lights. They like said, they're not sensitive to light. They're sensitive to space. That when it's in a small space and a dry space, they could get really piercing. And versus if you're in a big church with very reverberant space, it could be really, really pretty. You have no control with it. And I remember there was one time I was performing in Belgium. In Europe, I mean, in summer, it's also very common that people don't use air conditioner. They just open the windows. but they also respect your music. They wanted to close the window when it started. So I did the sound check. I did the sound check with the windows on, and I did not know that before the performance they closed all the windows, and my instrument started. I mean, my instruments just could not speak a word at all. And I had to stop. I was like, excuse me, can we open some windows? But also with the people in there, it changes the whole acoustic of the space. Um, and it's it was challenging, especially in the beginning, that I thought I was struggling with that. And of course, now I have more strategies to make it more stabilized. But at the same time, you don't want it to be so stabilized that you do the same thing all the time. You do want, I guess I'm also kind of get used to finding interactions in the space between people. And so I do like this variable in my piece. So yeah, so it's very interesting that to hear you guys look at my pieces as the outsider and tell me, hey, there's actually a common theme.
What are you working on now?
um, Not much. I just moved to Germany. Um, and I just constantly finding different iterations of my piece, like the one that I did um, two weeks ago. Yeah. Um, and I like to see my instruments. They're all work in progress. However much I have developed it, there's always a space to push it a little further. So each performance, I try to do something that I've never done it before to push it a little further, or try to find different angles. Like last time, if I look at it from this angle, this time I want to look at it from this angle. Trying to create, trying to see how much potential this instrument could get or how much it could expand. Um, I'm also thinking of ways to develop my Lazy Susans. Right now, I have two Lazy Susans. And sometimes I mean, usually I play it as solo on one Lazy Susan. And I started earlier, right before the lockdown, I started to play with other people um, on my Lazy Susan in different configurations. And now I started to think maybe I can put more than two Lazy Susans together, because that Lazy Susan piece is also about relationships. And so I was very interested to see if I could put more Lazy Susans together and find a way to link them all together to multiply more relationships that could be musically interesting. So I have this idea. I haven't really decided if it would be a performative instrument or if it would be an installation. Um, but I do know that each of my instrument it's like saxophone or piano or violin. You need to develop a practice with that. And so I I used to be the kind of person who wants to have I want to tell myself at least I need to have one instrument per year or something. Now I don't. I just want to developing what I have at the moment. And if there is a cool idea, I wouldn't mind doing something new. But I know that there will be another huge chunk of time to develop a practice out of that. Like my light bulbs, I don't feel like I was in full control until maybe 2 years in. So I was performing quite not like so much, but like one or twice every month, and sometimes maybe more, but sometimes maybe none in a month. So I can still say I perform sort of regularly, and but it still took me 2 years to feel like this is my language. So I started to learn how to take my time, and I have 2 babies already. It's okay.
Well, I mean, thank you for your time, Viola. Kyle, do you have any more questions?
No, that's it. The next time we hang out, we'll have to drink prosecco and play duets with saxophones and lights.
That would be awesome.
I can't think of a better
I,
combination.
I love this combination of prosecco and and like
Every time I drink prosecco, I think about you, Viola.
me too. Well, let's do that. Let's do that. Either in Berlin or in back in New York or somewhere else.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
we'll see. We'll see how things go.
Yeah, this was
Yeah,
really
fingers crossed.
interesting, like to see Viola, because like I knew you in school, and obviously you've developed so much since then. So it's been fun to watch your, your artistry change and your path change, and then get to talk to you about it. So thank you. This is great.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Viola.
Yeah, take care. Stay healthy.
You too. Talk
You
to you
too.
soon.
Yeah, bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.